His book was never planned, it evolved. After dozens of radio interviews and hundreds of emails, it became very obvious that there were many more cases of missing people than what were contained in the Western and Eastern, missing 411 books. I should start this manuscript with a huge thank you to every person that sent me cases matching the profile I've written about. Each of the cases you sent was investigated and thoroughly researched, and many are included in this book. As cases were investigated and thoroughly understood, they sometimes led to additional cases, and even new clusters. We did realize early on that we couldn't have found every case matching our profile, and we knew that the public would assist us in our continued search. We also knew that there would be additional cases that occurred as we were in the field conducting research, and many of these recent cases are in this book. Before we get too far into the book, it is important to understand a few abbreviations that you will see multiple times in the narrative. FBI Federal Bureau of Investigation, RCMP, Royal Canadian Mounted Police, FUR, Forward-Looking Infrared Radar, NPS, National Park Service, FOIA, Freedom of Information Act. As a brief reminder of what the missing 411 books are about, I will include a short review. These books are about people who have disappeared in rural locations of the world. Yes, the world. The past two books have focused on North America. We are going global now. The books included the following criteria for inclusion: missing are people with disabilities, missing left with their canines, X, missing 411 North America and beyond, missing are found in or near creeks, rivers, or other bodies of water. There is geographical clustering of missing persons. Bad weather was associated with the disappearance. Swamps and briar patches played a predominant role in many disappearances. The vast majority of disappearances occur in the late afternoon or early evening. When the missing is found, many cannot or will not remember what occurred while they were gone. When the missing is located, the majority are semi-conscious or unconscious. When the missing is located, many are missing clothing or shoes or both. The missing is found in an area that was previously searched. Berries are inextricably related somehow with the disappearance. New clusters. With the publicity surrounding the first two books and the appearances I made, new information came to our attention, and soon 4 new clusters were discovered. The news coverage of the National Park's position on tracking missing persons statistics brought significant attention to other national parks not listed in previous books. We were already researching Mount Rainier National Park when the first 2, missing 411 books were completed. We had filed a Freedom of Information Act request on a case, and were waiting for a response. Subsequent to the release of the books, new cases inside the park were exposed, which again showed a geographical cluster of missing people inside another national park. Refer to the chapter inside this book for details on Mount Rainier. The other new cluster and another national park cluster is Sequoia National Park. Sequoia sits approximately 50 miles south of the largest cluster of disappearances anywhere in North America, Yosemite National Park. Sequoia sits in the Sierra Nevada mountains, occupying its position just as Yosemite does further north. The stories that emanate at Sequoia are just as baffling and perplexing as in any other cluster. Another new cluster is the Three Sisters Wilderness in the northern Cascades of Oregon. I documented the disappearance of Corwin Osborne in missing 411 western United States. This book brings forward additional cases directly from that wilderness and its surrounding area. An East Coast cluster was added in the Adirondack region of New York. This region was brought to our attention in missing 411 eastern United States with the documentation of the Douglas Legg disappearance. The Green Berets were brought into the area and were supposedly used to search for the boy. We allocated more time to the Adirondacks and found a significant group of missing persons that was very disturbing. 4 new clusters: Mount Rainier National Park, Washington Sequoia National Park, CA Three Sisters Wilderness, or Adirondacks, New York. New category co-eds. During our research in various parts of the United States, I first came upon a student missing from a school that my son was attending, Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. I first heard about this case and then committed over 2 weeks to being on site and examining the facts behind the disappearance. You will find this event to be one of the most unusual and disturbing cases I have ever written about. The reality of finding this case led me to research the disappearance of other co-eds across North America, and that led to a special section in this book devoted specifically to university and college students that disappeared. I did write about the disappearance of Paula Weldon from Bennington, Vermont, in Missing 411 Eastern United States. Paula was a student at the college that took a daytime hike to a local mountain and disappeared under very unusual circumstances. This was really the first case I wrote about that relates to college students. There was also a case involving two Missing 411 North America and beyond. University of California, Berkeley students, Orvar von Loss and Walter Gordon, that both disappeared within months of each other at Yosemite National Park. The disappearance of the UC students actually fits two different criteria in this book: multiple disappearances and co-ed disappearances. You will find this new section chilling in that the disappearances fit many of the criteria found in the general section of this book, and you may come to some conclusions on your own about the disappearances of some of the brightest minds FN our collegiate arena. International disappearances, we don't have the resources to put feet on the ground in other countries, but we do have the ability to review online sources and conduct follow-up research on recommendations on cases from readers. It was this added work that led to an international section. For the first time, you will be able to read about missing person cases that match our profile from outside of North America. There have been several cases added to the Alberta province cluster and other cases added for many of the provinces in Canada. The following is a list of the countries added in the international section and what they represent. Australia. 1/VO cases of missing people are explained, and their rela-. Tie-in-ship to North American cases is explored. England. 1 case is examined and the elements within the parents are explained and discussed. Dis-P. Indonesia. A relationship is explored between missing people in a jungle setting and the wearing of bright-colored clothing. Zealand. A story is shared about people and boulders/rocks. Multiple disappearances. This is another new section that evolved after looking at thousands of cases, and certain groupings started to make themselves known. This section is related to multiple disappearances. To place cases in this section takes a certain amount of common sense and a certain amount of reality checking. There are no hard and fast rules about the parameters of this section. If 2 cases occur in the same geographical area in a relatively short time span, and there are no other cases found in that area from the previous years, they should probably be in this section. Groupings can be from the same school, disappearing from the same location, or even disappearing together. Below is the list of flocatlons where we have documented multiple disappearances: Idaho, Lewiston, Wyoming, Alva and Bitterroot National Forest, Colorado, Evergreen, Maine, Lenox, New York, Scroon Lake, Indian Lake and Lost Pond, British Columbia, Canada, Willow River and Bonnet Hill, California, Sequoia National Park and Point Reyes National Seashore, Alaska, Wasilla and Talkeetna, Jersey de Sap, Jade, Rancis. The majority of the book is divided by Western and Eastern United States and into individual states within each section. This section is organized in a similar manner as the previous, Missing 411 books. I asked the reader to absorb each of the disappearances and their facts. I guarantee that the facts in each case are true, as they came directly from news articles, Freedom of Information Act acquired, reports, magazines, and first-hand interviews. You will probably need to go back and reread certain sections, as the stories will start to blend together and the facts behind the cases are so similar. If you have children, think back to when your kids were the ages of the victims when they vanished. Apply a common-sense approach to these cases and see if your children could have traveled the distances that many of these kids managed to cover. At the end of the book will be my personal email address where you can send feedback. List of missing. As in each of the past books, I have included a list of the missing by the date they disappeared. You will again find this section near the back of the book. In my previous books, I asked any statisticians or computer programmers to look at what is presented and determine if they could calculate the odds of the specific clustering or the specific clusters of missing children by years. I never did get a response. National Park Service. The National Park Service has not changed its policy on missing people. They still do not track people missing inside their system and claim they have no lists of missing. Every senior law enforcement officer I know, in state or local government, does not believe that the NPS doesn't track this information. Because these books have not garnered national press attention, the pressure by the public on the NPS to change its policy hasn't yet occurred. Tracking missing people isn't rocket science and doesn't cost money. Each park needs a clipboard, binder paper, and a numbering system. Each time someone vanishes, document the name, date, time, location, one sentence about the circumstances, and the report number of the incident. When someone is found anywhere in the park, rangers can go back to the clipboard and quickly reference who the person may be. Any ranger with a laptop and Excel spreadsheet could easily upgrade the tracking system. Each time another person disappears, the spreadsheet is updated and emailed to all rangers in the park. Again, no additional funds needed. This is not time-consuming, not expensive, and yet can reveal problems inside their system that need to be addressed. Why wouldn't they be doing this? The Park Service apparently sees no value on tracking missing people doubtful. Hundreds of emails from readers have stated that the Park Service certainly sees the value in tracking, but they are afraid that this list would be leaked to the public, and the vastness of the missing person problem inside the park system would be known. If the Park Service is purposely concealing this issue, then we have a governmental agency that is so grossly corrupt it screams of a congressional investigation. Let me state that the NPS has complied with the majority of my FOIA requests for documents. They have never supplied any list of missing people. They have referred me to other published books that are related to missing people, so I could paste together a partial list. I have always wondered if my books ever made it into the hands of any of the relatives of people who have disappeared in a national park. It is those people that have the political power to orchestrate change. They would need to go to their congressman or senator, explain what is occurring, and demand a policy change. Maps we did include state maps in the first 2 missing books. The feedback we received indicated they were hard to visualize. We understand that and apologize. It is very difficult to find a quality map that fits within the confines of a book and which we can license for a reasonable fee. We're going to recommend that readers use Google Maps to plot the missing, and we hope to place a larger map on the canamissing.com website where you can get a wider picture of the issue. There will be no state maps in this book. Review the vast majority of the cases you will read about have been written about before, but the connections you see here have not been discussed. Many of the missing are not in any databases and will not be talked about in missing person forums. The cases were found by thousands of hours of research, scouring older newspapers, referrals by readers, and pure luck. If you know of a case that needs to be reviewed and subsequently researched, please forward us the related information. These are not normal missing person cases. Thousands of cases have been researched and reviewed, and those eventually became what are found in the missing 411 books. Specific criteria were applied to these cases for them to get to this section. Yes, cases were heavily screened for facts and background to be applied to these books. I worked several cases as a police officer where we utilized FBI profiling reports to assist us in the investigation. According to the freedictionary.com, profiling is a formal summary of or analysis of data, often in the form of a graph or table, represented ng distinctive features or characteristics. While I am nowhere near an FBI profiler, I do recognize unusual facts and circumstances and view the presentation of those in correlation to missing people as a significant history lesson that needs additional public exposure and research. Please read these cases with an open mind and apply common sense to the circumstances that are explained. You may want to stay close to a computer or iPad, as referring to online maps for location correlation may assist in the understanding of the locations and miles traveled. Chapter 1. Western United States, Alaska, named Kevin Robert O'Keefe, Michael Palmer, Charles Palmer, v. Gerald DeBerry, Paul Michael Lemaitre. Date, time, missing time, age, sex, location 10/08/8536M Glacier Bay National Park. AK 06/04/99-4 AM 15M Wasilla. AK 04/10/10-7 PM 30M Talkeetna, AK 10/I0/11-6:45 PM 53M Fairbanks, AK 07/04/12-7 PM 66M Seward, AK. Refer to chapter on multiple disappearances, Kevin Robert O'Keefe, missing October 8, 85. Wolf Point, Glacier Bay National Park, AK. Age at disappearance. 36 years Freedom of Information Act. Glacier Bay National Park is approximately 70 miles northwest of Juneau. The park sits in an extremely wild and remote area where the Pacific Ocean forms a series of small to large inlets from a wide inlet going north from the region of Thunder Bay State Marine Park. Kevin O'Keefe traveled from his home in Sacramento, California, and arrived in Juneau on or near September 20th, eventually flying on to the Glacier Park headquarters. He enrolled in and attended a class about living in the wilds of the park. On September 22nd, he was flown by float plane into Muir Inlet, just north of Wolf Point, where he established camp. He was traveling alone. On October 8, 1985, National Park Ranger David Namath and his partner were patrolling the region of Wolf Point by boat. When they stopped at Kevin's campsite, rangers found a disturbing sight. Kevin's tent was near the high tide line, and this is where they also found a line of debris that appeared to be strewn by the high water mark. The ranger made special mention in his report about the tent having one pole inside that had come down. They found his sleeping bag, foam pad, and other items outside the tent, lying on the ground. Rangers knew that Kevin was supposed to be picked up on October 10th and decided to leave his camp untouched. From reviewing National Park Service (NPS) reports, which were obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request, it appeared there was concern. Rangers went back to the camp the next day, but this time 4 rangers went. They found the camp just as it had been the previous day, and it did not appear as though anyone had used it during the night. The NPS did not conduct any searches, but they did call for Kevin and didn't get any response. On October 10th, rangers again returned with the additional assistance of an airplane, a Cessna 206 on floats. Rangers conducted a 2-hour flight over the area, looking for Kevin, but they could not locate him. On October 17, 1985, the Anchorage Daily published an article describing what NPS rangers found at Kevin's campsite. Aided by search dogs, they found his boots and a hat half a mile away, down in a gully out of sight of the main camp. They found his FOD and caches too, but they never found any sign of the 36-year-old tourist. Later, in the same article, rangers speculated about what may have happened to Kevin. What happened to Kevin O'Keefe may never be known. Rangers have rejected early speculation he was eaten by bears. The rangers stated there were no bear tracks anywhere in the area of Kevin's camp and even added, almost no wildlife of any kind. A review of the NPS report and itemization QF Kevin's property indicates items were located at intervals of 60, 120, and 200 to 300 feet from his tent, and that his boots and knit hat were found in a gully. It appears that everything that Kevin needed to survive was at his camp. He had survival books and pamphlets, film, food, a toothbrush, soap, cigarettes, vitamin C, a compass, a flashlight, and Alaska. Other assorted items that you'd expect to find in a campsite where someone was staying for over 1 month. Summary: NPS rangers did contact Kevin's family and found that he had planned to take a series of short hikes from his camp on a daily basis. He had not planned on any lengthy overnight treks or meeting other people. Rangers had found Kevin's day pack in an inventory search, indicating he had not left his camp. Kevin's glove liner was found several hundred yards from his main camp. His boots and knit cap were found almost a half-mile from camp and found only with the aid of search dogs. If you have been a reader of cases I've outlined in past books, you'll understand how these clues start to look familiar. Patrick Whalen disappeared from Glacier National Park in Montana on November 2, 2000. His tent was found crumpled, same as Kevin's, and his boots were inside his tent. Patrick Whalen was 33 years old when he vanished, and he was never found, missing 411, Western United States. There are too many cases to quote where the victim vanishes and their shoes somehow are found, or the victim is found without their shoes. Alaska is a location that is not forgiving. You must have shoes if you are to survive. Rangers never answered the obvious question of why Kevin's sleeping bag and other items were outside his tent. This makes no sense. Rangers did not find any indications of an animal attack, and there was no blood located at the scene. Knowing that Kevin's boots, day pack, primary pack, sleeping materials, and food were located at the site, one must deduct that Kevin was at his camp when something happened. It's apparent that there are no animals in this area, as Kevin's food was not disturbed. Why would Kevin take his boots off? Did Kevin voluntarily take the boots off? It's amazing how someone disappears in a mountainous area somewhat near a population zone, and hundreds of searchers participate in the hunt. When you disappear in a remote region, hardly anyone looks for the victim. There was not a week-long sustained missing 411 North America and beyond ground search for Kevin O'Keefe. There were a few flyovers, boats cruising the coast, but not an extensive ground search. Why? It appears obvious that Kevin was somewhere inland from the point where they found his boots. Why not keep going deeper into the woods? If Kevin's boots and glove liner were found quite a distance from his camp, I would suggest a sustained effort to search in that direction. This effort was never made by NPS Rangers.
Why?
Michael Timothy Palmer Charles Palmer v. Refer to multiple disappearances, chapter for details on these cases. Gerald DeBerry missing 10/10/11-6:45 p.m., northeast of Fairbanks, Alaska. Age at disappearance 53 YRs. It's a very rare event when a search team finds its missing party and then has to start searching for one of their own personnel. This is exactly what happened on October 10, 2011, along the Steese Highway at mile 70 northeast of Fairbanks. Gerald DeBerry was a volunteer that responded to a call to search for Melinda Mindy Stratz of Utah. DeBerry was a veteran of other searches and knew the area very, very well. He responded with his green Yamaha Kodiak four-wheeler and joined the efforts to find the woman. This event started at approximately 2 a.m. WH, and Mindy got separated from the other four-wheelers in her group. Mindy's brother, Michael Stratz, contacted authorities and reported her as missing. Michael went to the Long Creek Lodge and told law enforcement that his sister was just on a trail coming back from the wilderness. He reported that her red four-wheeler, trailer, and Jack Russell Terrier had vanished. Alaska State Troopers responded and started to gather troops for a comprehensive search. In the morning hours of October 10th, a number of searchers had arrived to assist. Late in the afternoon, Gerald had made a comment to others that he was starting to get cold. Other searchers built a fire, and someone gave Gerald another overcoat. After Gerald got warm, he again went out looking for Mindy. As Gerald was out searching, another volunteer found Mindy alive and well near Frozen Foot Creek. There are few details available about Mindy's case other than what's been noted. Searchers started to gather and head home when someone noticed that Gerald hadn't come back to his vehicle. Several of the original search teams went out to look for him. It was reported that Gerald was last seen 4 miles from the trailhead they had started searching. Searchers were told that Gerald had medical problems, but the medical condition was not released to the public. Early in the morning of October 11th, 2 different helicopters with forward-looking infrared radar, FLIR, started scanning the woods, looking for a heat signature. The Alaska State Troopers sent their helicopter and Piper Super Cub, while the Alaska Air National Guard sent rescue teams to cover the ground. Formal and informal searches for Gerald continued for a week with no evidence of him being found. The owner of the lodge where searchers were staging was Paul Potvin, an old friend of DeBerry's. The Alaska Dispatch on October 14th printed a statement from Paul about the search for his friend. "It's a mystery," said Potvin. "The four-wheeler is gone. Something had to have happened to him.
He didn't get lost."
Everybody agrees with that. He's been out their way too many times to get lost. That's the most baffling part. If Gerald didn't get lost, then where was his four-wheeler? If the four-wheeler was in the area at the time the FLIR was in the sky, it should have indicated a heat signature. It didn't, or it wasn't there. Almost 1 year after Gerald vanished, on Labor Day 2012, a miner was walked near the Faith Creek mine at mile 69 on Steese Highway and found Gerald's four-wheeler. It was on a slight incline, and the engine had been turned off. There was another massive search for Gerald in the region surrounding his vehicle, and nothing was found. Summary: I pulled maps of the Faith Creek area to understand the location where Gerald's vehicle was found. It was located one small mountain range to the northwest of Steese Highway. There is actually a roadway that travels from the highway north toward the mine. There is a small valley that borders the north side of the small mountain that moves parallel to the highway. It is extremely hard to imagine how Gerald was unable to find his way back to search headquarters, even if the vehicle had failed. The man knew the area very well, and conditions were such that it was no more than a walk of 3/4 of a mile back from the vehicle to the roadway. Gerald would have known not to walk further north, because there was a larger mountain range in that direction. I find it very peculiar that aircraft with FAR never found Gerald's vehicle. The Alaska State Troopers are experts at search and rescue, and do this regularly. To look in a fairly confined area and still be unable to locate a vehicle with FLIR is odd. In one last attempt to find anything the night that Gerald vanished, the Alaska Air National Guard sent a second FAR-equipped aircraft and swept the region, finding nothing. Gerald's sisters flew to Alaska to assist with their brother's affairs. One of Gerald's sisters, Cheryl Hart, made the following statement to WDAP on October 20th. "We just have to keep the faith and hope, that he either wanders in or we find him." Gerald DeBerry has never been found. Paul Michael Lemaitre, missing 7/04/12 to 7 p.m., Seward, Alaska. Age at disappearance: 66 years. As someone who has run in several IOK races during my years, I know that fatalities associated with road races are unfortunately a reality. Having a runner disappear, though, is not only unusual, but also almost unheard of. I will admit that the races I've run were along major city streets and not through forests or rural areas. The disappearance we are discussing here occurred at one of the oldest races in the world, at a location where they had never before had a fatality or a disappearance, the Mount Marathon in Vard, Alaska. Seward is a port city just 60 miles south of Anchorage, with its primary elevation at sea level. The Mount Marathon is described as follows on the Seward Chamber of Commerce website. Launched in 1915, the 3-mile Mount Marathon is a combination run, hike, and scramble up Seward's signature 3,022-foot peak. The race is one night to a certain in number of runners that are chosen through a lottery and competitive activities. The race starts in downtown Seward and then heads up the mountain to the summit and then back down. The site states that minor injuries are common, major injuries and disappearances are not. The exact length of the course is 3.1 to 3.5 miles, depending on that year's layout. The average angle of the trail is 38 degrees, the steepest slope is 60 degrees, and the start is at the corner of 4th Avenue and Adams Street in downtown Seward. The finish line is at 4th Avenue and Washington. On July 4, 2012, Paul Michael Lemaitre had done all of the preparation possible for the race of a lifetime. At 66 years young, Paul was in very good shape for his age and was a civilian employee at Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson. He was a counselor who assisted people leaving the military in getting their resumes in order. He had registered for the Mount Marathon and was assigned bib number 548. Paul had family members at the start line 3 p.m. when the gun went off to begin the race. Paul had decided that it was a feat to finish, not to race to the finish. He just wanted to make a respectable run and complete the course in a timely manner. Just as a barometer of how fast this race can be completed, Fred Moore, age 72, completed this year's course in 1 hour, 11 minutes, and 34 seconds. This was Moore's 43rd consecutive race. As the race was taking place, there were a few unusual events that were occurring. In 2 separate incidents, runners fell in a steep section of the course and were seriously injured. There were very few details about what exactly happened other than the injuries were listed as serious. This was a very unusual occurrence for the race, as the Chamber of Commerce was proud of its history of being a safe race. Paul was wearing black running shorts and a black running shirt. He had poor eyesight and was not wearing glasses the day of the race. From all accounts that were reviewed for this segment, Paul was the last racer on the mountain. A July 9, 2012, article on the KTU.com website had this explanation from the last person to see Paul. According to the chamber, a race timing crew stationed at the top of the mountain began its descent about 5:45 p.m. The lead timer, who was not named in the statement, spoke with Lemaitre at about 6 p.m. when he was nearing the mountaintop. The timer had reported that Mr. Lemaitre verbally confirmed that he wanted to continue, chamber officials wrote Monday. He looked good and did not demonstrate any sign of distress or physical or emotional concern and was moving slowly and steadily up the mountain. The timer then continued down the trail. At 6 p.m., a race official spoke to Paul's wife and explained that he had been seen and was fine. They explained that if he wasn't down the mountain in 90 minutes, she should contact the authorities, but they thought he was fine.
Alaska.
At 8 p.m., Paul's wife contacted race officials and notified them that Paul had not come back from the run. Race officials contacted the Seward Fire Department, who in turn contacted the Alaska State Troopers, and a search was started. Searchers encountered treacherous conditions as they tried to cover every conceivable location where Paul may have wandered. The visibility was horrible at times, as fog had hit the mountain. Ground searchers confronted 2 black bears that ran away from the people. No grizzlies were sighted. There was a dusting of snow near the summit of Mount Marathon the night that Paul vanished. Searchers carefully examined the area and found no tracks. Alaska State Troopers' Hello teams responded and continually covered the mountain with FLIR and found no evidence of Paul. The Alaska Mountain Rescue Group covered the mountain on the ground and found nothing related to Paul. To understand the scope of the search for Paul, the Alaska Dispatch ran an article on July 9, 2012, explaining who contributed to the effort to find the runner. Hundreds of volunteers have been involved in the rescue operation, including the Alaska Mountain Rescue, Nordic Ski Patrol, Alaska Search and Rescue Dogs, Bear Creek Volunteer Fire Department, National Park Service, Seward Police and Fire Department, the Air National Guard, Alaska State Troopers, and many Sawark residents, as well as racers who returned to Seward to help with the search. Several dog teams from the Alaska Search and Rescue Dogs did cover the mountain attempting to find Paul's scent. Nothing of value was found by the canine search teams. Summary: Paul Michael Lemaitre disappeared in an area where there had been hundreds of runners, an area that had a very well-marked trail and an overlook near the summit where there can be no mistake in which direction Seward and the finish line is located. The summit area has very little foliage and lots of rock, dirt, and boulders. An extremely comprehensive 4.5-day search for Paul failed to find him or any evidence that he was on the mountain. Yet we know for a fact that he was 200 feet from the summit at approximately 5:45 to 6 p.m. on July 4th. Paul actually saw the direction that the race official was walking down the mountain. He knew the correct path to take. He was less than 2 miles from his family and safety. This case is another example in a long line of missing persons cases where the last person in line disappears and is not found. I know that it seems as though there should be an easy explanation of what happened to Paul. There is not. Paul had some of the best and most experienced searchers in the world looking for him, yet he couldn't be found. You had some of the most sophisticated FLIR technology in the sky looking for him. FLIR could not locate Pauj. Searchers did not confine themselves to the race path or trails. They actually went to the backside QF the mountain in the event Paul got completely disoriented and dropped over the other side. Searchers found nothing of value on the backside of Mount Marathon. Paul was formally listed as deceased by exposure, and his family wrote an obituary for him in an Anchorage paper. Searchers were confronted by bad weather, fog. Canines could not find a scent trail. Paul was confirmed to have poor eyesight. He was the last runner on the trail when he vanished. Helicopters and airplanes utilizing FLIR could not find Paul. At 6 feet 2 inches and 215 pounds, Paul was not a small man. Something unusual happened on Mount Marathon 9 and our nation's anniversary in 2012. Paul Lemaitre was the victim of the unusual event. In the unfortunate event that another disappearance occurs in this area 30 years from now, the fact that someone disappeared on Mount Marathon will not be in any missing persons database because Paul Lemaitre is legally dead. Washington named Tommy Jenkins, Gunnar Peterson, Charles Warner, and Marie Burr, Cody Sheehy, Richard R. Lee, Page Wilson, Patty Krieger. Date 5 missing age sex location 05/04/50 noon 2 m Fort Lewis. WA 08/06/50 p.m. 65 m Churchill Mountain. WALL/21/53 m Pendleton, or 08/31/61-5:30A, and 8F Tacoma. WA04/27/86-2:30 p.m. 6M Blue Mountains, or 09/LL/04/47M Kulchuk Lake, WA08/20/10-4 p.m. 8F Colville, WA10/21110-1 p.m. 65F Rockport, WA. Tommy Jenkins Missy G5/04/1950, noon, Fort Lewis, Washington. Age at disappearance, 2 or 3 years. Discrepancy in reports. Fort Lewis is just 2 miles southwest of TAC A, but has very wild regions, specifically for the training of its soldiers. The 33,000-acre fort that housed 6,000 soldiers in 1950 sits on the southeast side of American Lake, with Interstate Highway 5 bisecting the property. The region of the fort that borders the lake is still quite wild and undeveloped. Tommy Jenkins lived on Fort Lewis with his father and mother in a non-commissioned housing area about 1,500 feet from American Lake. Reports vary on Tommy's age, stating anywhere between 2 and 3 years old. On May 4th, near noon, Tommy was outside playing with a neighbor's Irish setter named Lassie. One soldier reported he saw the boy and the dog playing at a gravel quarry not far from his residence. This was not confirmed. When Tommy didn't come home for lunch, authorities were called and a search initiated. The commander of Fort Lewis pulled every available soldier to search for Tommy Jenkins. Over 6,000 men and women covered every inch of the base looking for the small boy, focusing on the area near the gravel pit and the region near the beach and water. They found nothing. The commander put helicopters and planes into the air. They found nothing. 3 different bloodhounds were brought to the base and attempted to pick up Tommy's scent. The dogs found nothing. On the 3rd day of searching, and in an area previously searched numerous times, searchers heard sounds near the beach.
The
men fought their way through heavy brush to find Tommy and Lassie playing on the beach of American Lake, alive and well. A May 8, 1950, article in the Saskatoon Star-Phoenix had the following about TQMMY being found. Major Artie N. Heap, Fort Lewis Provost Marshal, said Saturday that 3-year-old Tommy Jenkins, who has been missing 2 days, has been found alive and well. He apparently had been kidnapped, Major Heap said, and returned to the point which he was picked up. Later in the same article, there is another quote from the Army official. No 3-year-old boy could have survived 2 nights in the open with weather as we have had in the last 48 hours, said Major Heap. During the time that Tommy had been missing, temperatures were down to the low 40s, and there was sporadic rainfall. Sergeant William Jenkins attempted to question his son about his disappearance, but didn't get clear answers. The boy did state he slept in areas where there were no homes. He stated that he had fallen in a creek with the dog, yet the boy and the dog were dry. There were other statements made by Army officials confirming that they did not believe that Tommy had been in the area where he had been found for the previous 48 hours. They also confirmed that the boy was in too good of physical condition to be out in the elements for the entire time he was missing. The Independent Record of Helena, Montana, ran an article on May 6 about Tommy being found. Reporters attempted to question Mrs. Jenkins about Tommy and how he could be found in such phenomenal condition, and she stated, "I can't understand it. I can't understand it." Gunnar Peterson missing 08/06/50 p.m., Churchill Mountain, Colonelville National Forest, WA. Age at disappearance, 65 years. The location of this disappearance is significant. Churchill Mountain is just 20 miles north of Colville and its Indian, Washington, reservation, a location of ice strangeness that covers many, many years. The location here Gunnar disappeared is just 2 miles south of the Canadian border. Gunnar Peterson was with family members picking huckleberries on the 4,800-foot-tall mountain. The region is lush with thick forests and hundreds of small bodies of water. Gunnar vanished while just feet away from family members. They searched and yelled for the man for hours, but never received an answer. The Peterson family, CH lead the Stevens County Sheriff. Sheriff Beryl Warren led the search for Gunnar and enlisted the assistance of local residents, law enforcement officers, Forest Service personnel, and the local military. The family described Gunnar as being 5 feet, 8 inches tall, and weighing 150 pounds. He was wearing overalls. Sheriff Warren summoned bloodhounds from eastern Washington and Idaho and had them join the search the second and third day. The canines could never pick up Gunner's scent and never seemed to figure out the direction he may have been traveling. On the 10th day of the search, Mr. and Mrs. W. A. Graves of Tacoma, the daughter of Gunner, and her husband were searching 5 miles from Churchill Mountain when they found him. The discovery of Gunner is described in the August 18, 1950, Lewiston Morning News. Mrs. Graves said her father appeared in good health. She said he had lived on berries and had taken refuge in abandoned shacks during the nights. He could account only for 8 of the 10 days he had been missing and apparently had been knocked unconscious by a falling limb or rock. Summary location of this disappearance immediately raised a flashing yellow light in my mind. The further I dug into Gunner's disappearance, the stranger it got. The people who disappear huckleberry picking are some of the most difficult cases, and I have no idea why. What could be the associate of a man picking huckleberries in the woods and his subsequent disappearance? In many of the disappearances I have chronicled over the years that fit our criteria, the people either cannot explain what happened or something occurred, and they can't remember, as in Gunner's case. Gunner doesn't even remember how he might have been injured. That's how confused he was. I think it's highly ironic that hundreds of people, Forest Service aircraft, bloodhounds, and equestrians spearhead for Gunner, and it was his daughter and her husband H.T. found the lost man. Is that coincidental? Charles Warner, missing November 21, 53, Umatilla National Forest, Tollgate, or age at disappearance, 40 years. This case is placed in the Washington chapter because it is approximately 20 miles south of the Washington border. Tollgate is located in the Blue Mountain Range, the same range where a series of missing elk hunters have disappeared, all chronicled in Missing 411 Western United States. Charles Warner and a friend traveled to the Umatilla National Forest from his home in Sisters, Oregon, for elk hunting. The men went to a region 5 miles south of Tollgate and entered the wilderness off a rural road. His partner last saw Charles on Saturday, approximately 1 mile into the woods. Charles didn't return to meet his friend, and officials were immediately notified. Weather conditions were hazardous, and there was snow falling. The 2 sons of Charles did respond to the search location and assisted in looking for their father. Airplanes, the U.S. Forest Service, the Count One Sheriff, and volunteers all scoured the wilderness looking for Charles. They found nothing. The organized search for Charles Warner was terminated on November 29, I-953. Considering that Charles walked into the wilderness from his vehicle and was not camped in the woods makes this case unusual. Mr. Warner was limited in the distance from the roadway he could travel, based on the confirmed observation made by his hunting
partner.
The search parameters were set in a region near the hunter's vehicle. He should have been found. Anne-Marie Burr, missing 8/31/61-5:30 a.m., 3000 block North 14th Street, Tacoma, Washington, A.G.E. at disappearance. 8 years the Burr family lived in a 3-story home in the 3000 block of 14th, Dollar Tree in North Tacoma. This was a fairly urban existence except for an overgrown creek region just north of the home that snaked its way to Commencement Bay. If it weren't for that overgrown creek, this case would not appear in this chapter. The night of August 31st, 1961, was like any other for the family of 6. Anne-Marie was sleeping upstairs with her sister, Mary, age 3, and Julie, age 7, and Greg, age 5, were sleeping downstairs in the basement. At 11 p.m., Mr. and Mrs. Donald Burr retired to their ground floor bedroom for a night of sleep. The night of August 31st to September 1st was anything but normal, and a night the family would never forget. The weather turned horrible, with heavy rain and winds ripping the neighborhood throughout the night. The Burr neighborhood was in a state of construction. Sewer lines up to 30 feet deep were open pits and penetrating all the nearby streets. Sometime during the night, Anne-Marie brought her sister, Mary, to her parents' bedroom for comfort because her sister was crying. Mary had recently broken her arm and was still suffering some pain. The parents weren't sure of the exact hour, but quickly went back to sleep. For some unexplained reason, at 5:30 a.m., Mrs. Burr became restless and got up. She admitted that this was an unusual time for her to rise, but she did and went into the living room. She found the front room window wide open and the front door latch undone. The door was unlocked and standing open. Mrs. Burr searched the house and found Anne-Marie gone. Mr. Burr was awakened, and a formal search of the residence and yard was completed, and then the police were called. Tacoma police found that a small bench was leaning against the sidewall below the window. The police also found footprints but couldn't determine their size because of the heavy rain during the night. In a very unusual part of this case, the Burrs had a family dog, a Cocker Spaniel, which the night of the disappearance was shut in a hallway between the kitchen and the basement entrance. The parents and the kids stated the dog never made a sound during the night. The police later made statements that they believed that someone might have taken Anne-Marie who knew the family, and that's why the dog never made a sound. Mr. Burr was a civilian employee at the National Guard Camp Murray. He was not wealthy, and a ransom demand was never made. Fort Lewis sent 100 soldiers, helicopters, and bloodhounds to assist in the search for the girl. Nothing was ever found. The FBI was monitoring the case but officially never entered because in their mind, that abduction was never proven. Tacoma police theorized that either an abductor came into the residence and took Anne-Marie, or she wandered away on her own. I sometimes have to seriously wonder what detectives were thinking when they made these statements. The front window of the residence was wide open, and a bench was leaning against an outside window. Why? Does someone believe that Anne-Marie just indiscriminately opened the front window of the residence during the night? Does someone believe that a family member walked out in the mud during the night? The puzzling part of the story is there is no mention in any articles of muddy shoe prints inside the residence, probably needed to prove a suspect entered the house during a rainstorm. It seems a strange coincidence that the neighborhood was going through major construction with the installation of sewer lines at the same time Anne-Marie disappeared. There have been dozens of articles about this case over the years. Some people theorize that Ted Bundy may have abducted Anne-Marie, but he has been eliminated. This case has been classified as abduction by Washington law enforcement. She has never been found. Summary: there is one other case that I've written about that has similarities to the Anne-Marie Burr disappearance. In Missing 411 Eastern United States, I chronicled the disappearance of Kevin J. Ayotte from Sugar Bush, Minnesota. Kevin was a 3-year-old hearing-impaired boy staying with his family at their summer cabin in rural northern Minnesota. Kevin was in an upstairs bedroom with his brother when he vanished. Kevin was never found, and searchers found nothing during searches of the region. Anne-Marie's residence is approximately 20 miles northeast of Fort Lewis, the location where Tommy Jenkins disappeared. Cody Sheehy, missing 4/27/86-2, 30 p.m., Blue Mountains outside Wallowa, Oregon. Age at disappearance, 6 years. The city of Wallowa, Oregon, sits at the far northeastern section of the state, 26 miles from Washington and 20 miles from Idaho, in the Blue Mountains. The city sits at an elevation of 2,948 feet with mountain peaks on its perimeter exceeding 5,000 feet. On April 27, 1968, Cody Sheehy went on a family picnic into the Blue Mountains. Cody and his 10-year-old sister, Carrie, were playing a game in the forest called Explorers, a game the kids made up where each person goes in a different direction. At approximately 12:30 p.m., the family couldn't find Cody. Marcy Sheehy, Cody's mom, was the lone adult in the group, as Cody's dad was in China on business. The group searched until 2:30 p.m. and then called law enforcement. The United States Forest Service, county sheriff, and state police all responded. Within 2 hours of the call for assistance, 2 helicopters were in the air looking for Cody, along with bloodhounds on the ground. Several equestrian teams responded and were able to cover huge distances within short periods of time. Throughout the first night, searchers stayed on the ground looking for the 6-year-old boy, yelling and calling for him, without any responses. Searchers were challenged in their search for the boy. Almost immediately after he was reported missing, rain started to fall in the mountains. Yendi continued through the night. Searchers were told that Cody was 3 feet, 10 inches tall, and weighed 40 pounds, not a large boy. At 7:30 a.m., Cody emerged from the wilderness by arriving at the home of Beverly Hansen, a resident on the outskirts of Wallowa. The boy asked for directions to his grandfather's ranch, and the woman stated it was too far away and invited Cody in and called the sheriff. An April 30th, 1986, article in the Beaver Times had the following. A 6-year-old boy walked overnight at least 18 miles to safety through the wilderness of northeastern Oregon while searchers on horseback combed the rugged terrain after he got lost on a picnic. Later in the same article was the following. Cody told his mother he climbed into a tree once during the night, afraid that he was being followed by coyotes. An April 29th article in the Hutchinson News had additional information about Cody's trip. His mother said the boy told her he hid during the night from a motorcycle and a helicopter. There wasn't a helicopter out there at night. He must have been hallucinating, she said. Cody was taken to the hospital for observation and was found to be in good health, considering his monstrous journey.
Summary.
It's claimed that Cody walked 18 miles through the rugged Blue Mountains in just 15 hours. He stated that he stopped and climbed a tree because he felt coyotes were following him. He also stated that he hid for some period of time from a helicopter and motorcycle that were not there. It is evident that Cody didn't walk nonstop because he was hiding for some period of time. Walking that distance for a 6-year-old boy under any conditions is a phenomenal feat, but to do it in the Blue Mountains and walk all the way to a residence is an unbelievable story. If you couple the story with what Cody claims he saw, it makes you question what really happened to this boy. In my years of researching missing people, there is only one other story in the western United States that comes remotely close. Washington. To the distances Cody covered in 15 hours, and that's the story of Keith Parkins. Keith Ice appeared in April 1952, coincidentally just 90 miles southwest of Wallowa in Ritter, Oregon. Keith was 2 years old and covered 12 miles of mountains in 19 hours and was found collapsed in a creek bed. I wrote about Keith's story in Missing 411 Western United States. I think it is highly coincidental that 2 young boys disappeared in close proximity to each other and were able to cover distances that no other child anywhere in the Western United States has ever accomplished. Just to gauge the unusual nature of Cody's feat, in the book Lost Person Behavior by Robert Kester, on page T35 he outlines distances children typically travel and makes recommendations for search and rescue teams. Kester states that a 4 to 6-year-old child will be found 95 akin to the time in a mountainous region at a distance of 3.7 miles or less from the point they were last seen. Cody traveled more than 4 times the distance quoted in the book and accomplished this in just 15 hours. Richard R. Lee missing 9/11/04. Kalchuk Lake. WA age at disappearance. 47 years. Kalchuk Lake sits in the middle of the Cascade Range approximately 2 miles northwest of Mount Stewart, 15 miles south of Lake Wenatchee, and 10 miles west of the town of Wenatchee. This area of the Cascades has more people that have disappeared and never been found than any other location in the region. Kalchuk Lake sits in a bowl that has no trees around its outside and is located at the 5,800-foot level. The region is extremely rough and rugged. On September 9, 2004, Richard Lee traveled from his residence in Hobart to the area of Kalchuk Lake for 2 days of hiking and camping. He completed a 2-day camping permit, filed it, and walked into the lake. At one point during those 2 days, Richard contacted his brother while he was on a ridgeline and indicated all was fine, and he just wanted to say hello. This was the last time anyone has ever heard of Richard. On September 11th, he didn't return to his residence. Richard was an extremely experienced and a well-prepared camper. Even though he didn't arrive at his residence as planned, that didn't immediately strike a note of emergency. Mrs. Lee eventually believed that something was drastically wrong and reported Richard missing on September 15th, the same day that searching started. The first group into the area was the Chelan County Mountain Rescue Team. They found Richard's vehicle parked at the trailhead and then were flown into the lake and started to search the area. Searchers decided to focus on Enchantment Lakes, Kalchuk Lake, and Lake Stewart. The searching for Richard didn't go smoothly or easily. Searchers were advised that Richard liked to hike off the trail and camp in areas where others would not. His campsite was not found immediately, and searchers had to trek cross-country much of the time in an effort to locate his camp, which they eventually found. Richard's tent, rolled-out sleeping bag, and food in a bag pulled into a tree, so bears could not get to it, were eventually found 500 feet off a trail near Kalchuk Lake. Searchers stated the camp looked like Richard just walked away from it. Everything in the tent was neat, as though he was ready to come back to it. Rescuers searched for 4 days and never found any evidence of where Richard might have gone. In a strange twist to this story, I was one of the speakers at the 2012 National Association of Search and Rescue, NASAR, Association Conference at Harvey's Lake Tahoe in June 2012. I spoke about a variety of circumstances related to our study and then explained many of the incidents where people were found far outside normal search and rescue parameters. Shortly after I returned from the NASAR conference, I received a very interesting series of emails from a search and rescue professional from Chelan County that was part of the search for Richard. He explained that this was one of the only incidents where he felt uncomfortable to be in the area of Richard's tent, and he couldn't explain why. He stated that it was an extreme effort to find the tent because it was obvious that he was traveling off-trail and they knew he wouldn't be in one standard campground. The searchers stated that the campsite that Richard had chosen had an eerie feeling to it, and it appeared just like someone walked away from it minutes earlier. He said that he would normally never write to me about something like this. In his many years of experience, he had always heard of others having strange feelings in the woods, but he stated that this was the first time that he personally had felt that something was definitely wrong with this area. Summary: volunteers from Chelan, King, Yakima, and Kittitas counties all volunteered on the search for Richard. Helicopters and planes went into the air in an attempt to locate some trace of Richard. Nothing was found. I stated earlier, this area of the Cascades is treacherous if you are alone. I have no idea why. When people are left alone, they disappear, and the majority are never found. I do understand why hikers and hunters are drawn to this region. It is gorgeous, but unforgiving. I sincerely doubt that anyone visiting this area truly knows the dangers involved with traveling its backcountry. One of the last items that the searcher wrote to me about was the feeling of the United States Forest Service, USFS, toward missing people. He stated that people disappear in the Cascades under very strange conditions, and the USFS probably doesn't want to talk about it. As in Richard's case, the searcher stated that the belongings that were left behind and the neatness of the tent, and the fact that it almost appeared as he had left everything of value in the tent, just didn't make sense. He made it clear that there were no indicators that Richard committed suicide. It was just a very, very odd disappearance. Paige Wilson missing 8/20/10-4 p.m., Floodell Campground, 19 miles east of Colville, Washington. Age at disappearance: 8 years. Paige was camping with her grandfather and cousins in a campground 19 miles east of Colville, Washington, in the Colville National Forest. The group was playing and having the normal fun that kids do in the wilderness. How Paige exactly vanished wasn't very clear, but she was noticed missing at 4 p.m. on August 20th. National Forest officials were notified, and they in turn called Fairchild Air Force Base for air support. The Spokane County Sheriff's Office for searchers and adjoining counties sent other assistance. Bloodhounds from different jurisdictions were brought to the scene of the disappearance, but none could track a scent to Paige. On Sunday at approximately 8 a.m. and nearly 4 miles from the point Paige was last seen, the girl was found walking along a lonely gravel road. She had many scratches and bruises on her arm, but was relatively in good shape. She had survived 40 hours in the wild with temperatures as low as 30 degrees. The television station KXLY had a short interview on September 12th with Paige and posted a statement on its website asking her to explain how she got lost. She said she wasn't sure what happened, but she looked around and she was alone and lost. A later statement on August 24th by the TV station KTVB asked Paige's parents what she had said about her 40 hours. She hasn't said much to anyone about her experience. Summary: the region around Colville has had many, many strange things happen over the years. Many of the unusual disappearances are documented in the Western edition of my first, Missing 411 book. Paige Wilson's statement about how she disappeared may be one of the most revealing you will ever read. Victims truly don't understand. Paige's statement about how she got lost almost sounds as though she was in one location one second and another location the next, which does. Washington. mimic the feelings and statements of many parents when they state their kids were right next to them 1 minute and then gone the next. Patty Krieger M. Singh 10/21/10-1 p.m. Sauk Mountain, Rockport, Washington. Age at disappearance: 65 years. Hearing impaired. The months prior to October 2010 had not been joyous for Patty and her live-in boyfriend, Larry Presley. Larry's parents had passed away, and the .2 decided to take his parents' ashes into the Washington Cascades and distribute them in the mountains. In the morning hours of October 21, 2010, Patty, Larry, and friends Nicole Gardner, Troy Robinson, Chrissy Baumgartner, and Matt Robinson and relative James Presley all drove to the top of Sauk Mountain Road, parked, and started the climb to the summit of Sauk Mountain. The group also had the companionship of Patty's Rottweiler dog, Bear, who followed Patty as the group made the hike. The road ends at an approximately 4,400-foot elevation, and then there is a steep trail that cuts back and forth until you reach 5,545 feet and the peak. This region has old-growth forests with some very thick and rugged mountains. Sauk Lake sits down in a bowl on the other side of the summit with an elevation of 4,025 feet. Patty was not someone who knew the outdoors well, but she also was known as someone who was tough and could withstand unusual conditions. She was also known to be nearly deaf without the assistance of the hearing aids that she wore in both ears, which she was wearing on this day. The group spread the ashes of Mr. and Mrs. Presley and proceeded back down the mountain. As the group was walking downhill, they came to a fork in the trail where Patty stated that she was going to take the fork and intimated she would meet the group later at the car. The group got Patty's attention, and she looked at them, didn't say anything, and continued down the fork with Bear. Everyone felt that the trail Patty was on would eventually lead back to the car. It didn't. The group arrived back at their vehicles and started to wait for Patty and Bear. They never arrived. The Skagit County Sheriff was called and reported Patty as a missing person as of 5 p.m. on October 2nd. Volunteer searchers, military aircraft equipped with FLIR, sheriff's deputies, and family all combed Sauk Mountain looking for Patty Krieger. They didn't find anything. Patty's son, Alan Patterson, was scouring the mountain on the second day of the search and thought he heard a dog growl and a bark. The bark and growl was heard in a very rugged and dangerous area. Follow-up searches around the mountain did not find Bear. On October 5th, after 3 days of non-stop search efforts, the Skagit County Sheriff's Office formally called off the effort to find Patty. Alan continued to go to the mountain on weekends, but nothing of any evidentiary value came forward until late October. 26 days after Patty vanished, a resident of Rockport, Washington, found a Rottweiler walking the mountains. It was Bear. The dog was malnourished and underweight but alive. Bear was taken to a veterinarian and put on a special diet to quickly get his energy back. Family and SAR officials took Bear back to the spot where Patty disappeared, but he didn't track. Other SAR officials also brought tracking dogs to the scene, and they also failed to find a scent, or refused to track. The discovery of Bear was important. It's extremely doubtful that any dog could survive 26 days without food. Somewhere Bear was able to find something to eat. There is plenty of water in the area. That wouldn't be an issue. It is surprising that with the number of searchers covering the area where Patty disappeared, that Bear didn't bark or run up to searchers if he was still in the immediate vicinity, especially if Patty was in distress. The area around Sauk Mountain is rugged and diffy.